It's been a bit of a shock. However much one tries to prepare oneself for something like this, it's still a dreadful shock, and we're still trying to come to terms with that. And it's very, very sad. But I have to say that the extraordinary tributes.
The walls of the palace have witnessed countless secrets, but few as explosive as this. A revered royal patriarch, nearing the twilight of his life, reportedly delivered a decision so unexpected, so deeply personal, that it sent shockwaves through the monarchy's inner circle. At the center of the storm stood Catherine and Camilla, two women whose futures suddenly became entwined in a battle over one of the most treasured symbols of royal legacy. So, what could have compelled such a stunning declaration, and why is the palace struggling to contain the fallout? Before we continue, tell us what you think. If you had the power to decide, should Catherine inherit these historic royal treasures, or should they remain with Camilla? Share your opinion in the comments below. To help us create more videos that shape the monarchy, please subscribe. Silent royal judgment, uneasy palace. For most of his life, he mastered a skill that few people in public life ever truly learn: saying nothing. While generations of royals found themselves pulled into headlines, controversies, and endless public debates, Prince Edward, Duke of Edinburgh, remained almost invisible. Yet behind that quiet presence stood a man who had witnessed nearly every major chapter of modern royal history. He had watched monarchs come and go, seen crises threaten the crown, and observed private family dramas unfold behind palace walls without ever revealing what he thought. That silence became part of his identity. It was not shyness, it was duty. For more than 8 decades as Duke of Edinburgh, he represented a disappearing generation that believed loyalty meant restraint. But those who stood at the National Service of Remembrance on a chilly morning in November sensed something unusual. The elderly Duke, supported by Sophie as he took his place among senior royals, appeared to carry far more than the weight of age. To understand why that moment attracted such attention, one must first understand the history he carried with him. Unlike many members of the royal family, the Duke of Edinburgh was not merely the guardian of a title. He was the living connection to a remarkable royal inheritance stretching across Europe. Through his mother, Princess Marina of Greece and Denmark, he inherited memories tied to lost kingdoms, fallen dynasties, and a world that vanished in the violence of the 20th century. Among the treasures connected to that history were magnificent jewels that had survived events most families could never imagine. Some had links to royal houses destroyed during the upheavals that followed the Russian Revolution of 1918. Others had passed through generations of queens and princesses, surviving wars, political turmoil, and changing times. Yet survival came at a price. Financial pressures eventually forced several priceless pieces to be sold privately. Famous tiaras disappeared. Historic necklaces changed hands. Some treasures may have even left Britain forever. For the Duke of Edinburgh, these jewels were never simply valuable objects. They were reminders of people, sacrifices, and histories that could never be replaced. By the time he reached his 90s, he had become one of the last living individuals who remembered many of those stories firsthand. Every remaining piece represented a responsibility, not a possession. Yet heritage alone does not explain the tension observers believed they detected in later years. There was another layer to the story, one rooted not in ancient dynasties but in personal observations accumulated since the 1980s. Decade after decade, the Duke watched events unfold from the shadows. He never publicly complained, never offered dramatic interviews, and never broke the discipline that defined his generation. But sometimes the strongest judgments are not delivered through speeches. Sometimes they are expressed through choices, timing, and a silence that suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. For years, one royal figure carried a memory that never faded, having witnessed a tragedy unfold quietly behind palace walls long before the world fully understood it. But what did the Duke of Edinburgh truly see as tensions closed in on Princess Diana? And why has this hidden perspective resurfaced now, demanding answers after so many years? Let's unravel the details. The silence that never forgot. For years, one royal figure carried a memory that never seemed to fade. Long before public opinion shifted and long before old wounds resurfaced in headlines, the Duke of Edinburgh had already witnessed a tragedy unfolding behind palace walls. As a senior working royal and a first cousin to the Queen, he occupied a position few people could ever imagine. He was present during private discussions, aware of tensions hidden from public view, and close enough to see the devastating toll they were taking on Princess Diana. What he witnessed was not simply the breakdown of a marriage, it was the slow unraveling of a woman who had entered royal life full of hope, only to find herself trapped in a situation that seemed impossible to escape. While the world admired her smile, those on the inside could see the emotional burden growing heavier with each passing year. The pain she carried was so profound that, according to those close to her, physical discomfort sometimes felt insignificant compared to the heartbreak she endured every day. Behind the glamour and ceremony, Diana struggled to understand why the man she loved appeared to have given his heart elsewhere. The presence of Camilla Parker Bowles cast a shadow over much of her marriage to Prince Charles, and that shadow only grew darker as the years passed. Friends and insiders described moments of deep despair, moments when Diana questioned her own worth and searched desperately for answers that never seemed to come. The Duke of Edinburgh saw far more than the public ever did. He watched a woman with extraordinary warmth and an unmatched connection to ordinary people fight a lonely battle inside an institution that appeared unable or unwilling to shield her from harm. Yet, like many men of his generation, he remained silent. Duty came first. Emotions stayed hidden. Public loyalty outweighed private feelings. But silence does not always mean acceptance. Memories have a way of lingering long after events have passed. Even after Diana's death in August of 1997, the images and experiences of those turbulent years remained with those who had witnessed them firsthand. Some wounds never truly heal, and some judgments take decades to form. That is why many observers believe later public moments involving the Duke of Edinburgh carried a deeper meaning than they first appeared to. To them, they were not sudden gestures or accidental slights. They were the quiet expression of feelings shaped over decades, feelings born from watching one of the most beloved women in modern royal history suffer, while those around her looked on. In that interpretation, his silence was never forgetfulness. It was patience, and patience, after many years, can sometimes sound remarkably like a verdict. Before the dispute over jewelry ever came to light, a deeper and more personal fracture was already forming behind palace walls. But what truly fueled the Duke of Edinburgh's growing conflict, and why did his devotion to the Duchess of Edinburgh, Catherine, place them on a collision course with the very institution meant to protect them? Now let's uncover the hidden palace rift deepened long before jewelry sparked feud. Duke of Edinburgh's final decision. Long before jewelry became the final spark in an already bitter feud, a far deeper wound had been quietly growing behind palace walls. For the Duke of Edinburgh, this was never simply about royal disagreements, shifting loyalties, or the endless dramas that surrounded the monarchy. The issue was far more personal, and it centered on the woman he loved. His wife, the Duchess of Edinburgh, Catherine, never fit comfortably into the image the royal institution preferred to present. While others appeared polished and unshakable, Catherine carried struggles that could not always be hidden. During the 1970s, she suffered a severe mental health crisis that led to treatment in a psychiatric facility, a deeply painful chapter that remained largely absent from official conversations. For years afterward, she battled depression, often withdrawing from public life with little explanation, leaving many to wonder where she had gone. Her decision to convert to Catholicism added another layer of controversy. Though deeply personal, it quietly placed her at odds with traditions that many within royal circles considered important. Yet those closest to her saw something entirely different. They saw a woman who had devoted much of her adult life to duty, while carrying emotional scars that never completely healed. What made matters worse was the way those struggles were allegedly discussed behind closed doors. According to accounts from former royal staff, Catherine's pain became the subject of unkind jokes among certain social circles. Conversations that should have inspired compassion instead became opportunities for ridicule. Words such as weak and unstable were reportedly tossed around carelessly, reducing years of documented suffering to little more than entertainment. At the center of these stories stood Camilla Parker Bowles. Witnesses claimed that gatherings often turned toward Catherine's difficulties, with laughter replacing sympathy. The Duchess of Edinburgh was never present to answer the criticism or defend herself. Her absence made it easier for others to speak freely, and the stories eventually found their way back to her husband. For the Duke of Edinburgh, the reports were impossible to forget. He watched a woman who had already paid a heavy emotional price for royal life become the target of mockery because of the very wounds that life had helped create. Any remaining warmth disappeared. What followed was not a temporary disagreement or a passing chill. It was a permanent closing of ranks, a relationship that would never recover. And just when it seemed the divide could grow no deeper, another controversy emerged, one involving jewelry that many believed pushed the situation beyond repair. By the cold morning at the cenotaph in November 2025, the visible moment was only the final shadow of a deeper conflict that had been building for years behind palace walls. But what hidden forces shaped this silent struggle, and why did the Duke of Edinburgh recognize a familiar pattern long before anyone else saw it coming? Let's find out. The jewelry battle that changed everything. By the time the cold morning at the cenotaph in November 2025 arrived, the real story had already been unfolding behind palace walls for years. What the public witnessed was merely the final shadow of a conflict that had been growing quietly, fueled not by speeches or public arguments, but by symbols, memories, and pieces of history that carried far greater meaning than their diamonds and gold suggested. Among those who watched the situation closely was the Duke of Edinburgh. Long before anyone else noticed, he had seen a familiar pattern emerging. It reminded him of another era, another woman, and another painful chapter in royal life. While most people focused on official appearances and carefully managed photographs, he was paying attention to what happened when the cameras were gone. The tension centered on jewelry, but the jewels themselves were never the true issue. Following Queen Elizabeth's death in September 2022, her personal collection was carefully reviewed so that treasured pieces could be distributed among members of the royal family. During that process, Catherine had privately hoped to receive a particular diamond brooch closely associated with Diana. She admired it not because of its value, but because it represented a connection to the woman whose legacy she had consistently honored throughout the years. When the final decision arrived, the brooch had already been assigned elsewhere. It would go to Camilla. Catherine accepted the news without complaint. There were no public remarks, no interviews, and no attempts to draw sympathy. Yet those closest to her noticed a change. The disappointment was impossible to hide completely. She continued carrying out her duties, but the sadness lingered beneath the surface. It was the kind of hurt she chose to endure quietly. Months later, another incident deepened the divide. During preparations for a state banquet in 2023, Catherine's household formally requested access to a historic Queen Mary tiara. The request never succeeded. The piece had already been reserved for Camilla during the same period. Within palace circles, many questioned whether the overlap was simply coincidence. Then came words that would prove even more damaging than any jewelry allocation. At a private gathering, Camilla reportedly criticized Catherine's habit of wearing pieces connected to Diana. According to accounts from those present, she suggested that Catherine's tributes were not genuine acts of respect, but calculated attempts to gain public affection. The remark shocked several guests and eventually reached Prince William. What followed was not a public feud, but something far colder. Relations between the households reportedly deteriorated dramatically. Through it all, Catherine remained silent, while observers watched the contrast between one woman asserting what she believed she deserved and another absorbing each setback without public retaliation. For the Duke of Edinburgh, that contrast spoke louder than any statement ever could, and long before the public noticed, he had already reached his conclusion. In the solemn stillness of the Senate during the National Service of Remembrance in November 2025, an unexpected moment broke through the ceremony's careful order. What really happened in those quiet seconds that shifted attention away from the royal gathering? And why did this fragile appearance by the Duke of Edinburgh become the focus of such intense scrutiny? Let's uncover the astonishing details. Silent Senate exchange changed everything. Under the hushed grandeur of the Senate during the National Service of Remembrance in November 2025, a moment unfolded that many later described as impossible to ignore. Long before the cameras stopped rolling, every senior member of the royal gathering had already taken their places, unaware that the most talked-about exchange of the day would come from a quiet interruption of respect. The Duke of Edinburgh, visibly weakened and supported closely by Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, stood with a fragility that made even the smallest movement feel significant. Those who watched him that day later recalled that his health had been failing for months, and many quietly believed it could be his final appearance at such a ceremony. But what unfolded within the crowd's gaze was not defined by sympathy alone. When Queen Camilla came into view, the Duke's reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He turned away without hesitation, offering neither nod nor glance, as though her presence carried no meaning in that charged moment. Instead, attention shifted toward Catherine, Princess of Wales, as he reached for her hand and held it longer than protocol required, drawing subtle but undeniable attention from those nearby. What followed was a brief exchange that those present would later struggle to forget, a quiet leaning in, a whispered statement about legacy, jewels, and rightful place. According to multiple accounts later pieced together, he spoke of the royal jewels belonging where they were meant to be, and of a lineage that should not be diverted. The implication was clear without a single name being spoken, yet everyone in the vicinity understood exactly who was being referenced. The atmosphere shifted almost instantly, as if the air itself had tightened around those who witnessed the exchange. By the end of the day, word of the incident had already reached Queen Camilla, and reports suggested that she was far from composed upon hearing every detail. Those present at the ceremony would later describe the moment as one that carried a weight beyond the formal remembrance itself, leaving questions that lingered in private conversations long after the dignitaries had departed the Senate grounds. Even in silence, the echoes of that exchange continued to travel through the corridors of royal memory, reshaping perceptions of loyalty, legacy, and where certain symbols of power were believed to belong, as reported by those close to the gathering in Westminster that day allegedly documented. What could have driven Queen Camilla to present such a carefully constructed argument to King Charles after the cenotaph ceremony? And why was this quiet private meeting treated with such institutional weight? What decision was being shaped behind closed doors, and how might this calm exchange alter the balance of power within the monarchy? Let's find out. The quiet verdict behind the crown jewels. The evening had barely settled after the solemn cenotaph ceremony in London, when a private meeting unfolded that would quietly shift royal conversations behind palace walls. In a calm, private room away from cameras, Camilla sat opposite King Charles. She arrived composed, presenting a carefully structured argument, precise and deliberate, treating the matter as one of institution and authority rather than emotion. Her concern centered on a decision linked to the Duke of Edinburgh, a senior royal whose long presence within the family carries quiet influence. At the ceremony earlier that day, his position was interpreted by Camilla as a symbolic challenge to her standing as queen consort. To her, it was not a private gesture, but a public moment that appeared to question the hierarchy of the monarchy. At a major national remembrance event in November 2025, she argued, such signals carried unavoidable weight. However, the basis of her concern rested on a misunderstanding of ownership. The jewels associated with the Duke of Edinburgh are not part of the crown jewels or the official royal collection. They are private property. Unlike symbolic regalia passed down through the monarchy, these pieces belong entirely to him, and he is free to decide their future, whether to gift, sell, or bequeath them in his will without royal approval. Camilla's position, although formally secure since her coronation in May 2023 and the later recognition of her crown in January 2025, did not shield her from a deeper unease. Her authority existed on paper, reinforced by ceremony and title, yet influence within the royal household is often shaped by memory, loyalty, and unspoken respect. And in that quiet hierarchy, the Duke of Edinburgh represented something Charles could not easily override. When Charles responded, his answer was firm but restrained. He acknowledged Camilla's concern but refused to intervene, insisting the Duke was entitled to make his own private decisions. The discussion ended there. Camilla left without protest, but those who know her well understand that silence after resistance is rarely surrender. It is recalculation. The Duke belongs to an older Windsor generation, shaped long before modern scandals and fractured public trust. He represents a time when duty outweighed desire, and personal sacrifice for the monarchy was expected rather than celebrated. Charles, by contrast, carries the memory of a more turbulent era, marked by the strain of his marriage to Diana, the lingering shadow of past choices, and their public consequences. Between the two men lies an unspoken history neither can ignore. The Duke remembers everything, and that memory itself holds influence no royal decree can erase. Charles understands this, and it informs his restraint. Beyond personal tension, a more practical concern quietly defines the situation. If the Duke's collection does not pass to a working royal like Princess Catherine, it could move into private hands. His sons, outside royal duty due to religious conversion, and his daughter, living privately, would inherit items once tied to ceremonial meaning. Pieces linked to Princess Marina and decades of royal history could disappear from public view entirely. In that reality, the Duke's decision is less emotional than calculated, an attempt to decide whether history remains visible or slowly fades behind closed doors. The Cambridge Sapphires have moved quietly through generations, from Princess Augusta to Queen Mary and then to Princess Marina, each transfer deepening their hidden legacy. But what makes these jewels more than royal adornments? And how did a centuries-old inheritance become a silent thread connecting women across time in ways few ever understood? Let's find out. Cambridge Sapphire's unbroken line. The Cambridge Sapphires carry a story that stretches across centuries, moving quietly from one generation of royal women to another, each one unknowingly completing a chapter in a long and unbroken chain of memory. Long before modern palaces and present-day ceremonies, the legacy first rested with Princess Augusta, Duchess of Cambridge, in the 19th century. After her death in 1916, the jewels passed into the care of Queen Mary, who treated them not as decoration, but as inheritance meant to survive time itself. Years later, in 1934, Queen Mary placed them into the hands of Princess Marina as a wedding gift, ensuring the story would continue rather than fade. Through wars, political uncertainty, and the gradual reshaping of the monarchy, the Sapphires endured as silent witnesses to survival. When William and Catherine became the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge in 2011, it felt like history folding back into itself, as if the title had been waiting for their return. This sense of continuity was not lost on the Duke of Edinburgh, who understood the symbolic weight of such heirlooms. For him, these jewels were never meant to fade into private vaults or forgotten collections. Instead, he saw in Princess Catherine someone who does more than wear royal pieces. She engages with their history. Over time, she has treated historic jewels as living echoes of those who came before. At the September 2025 state banquet, she wore the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara once linked to Diana, a choice widely read as symbolic in Westminster. Later, at Commonwealth Day in 2026, she appeared in Queen Elizabeth's Bahrain pearl earrings, quietly carrying the memory of the late monarch into a modern royal setting. By contrast, public comparisons with Queen Camilla have often highlighted a difference in perceived emotional continuity, with Catherine seen as more naturally connected to historical symbolism in her styling and appearances. The distinction, while subtle, becomes visible in moments when royal tradition is not only remembered, but felt. Recognizing this rare quality, the Duke of Edinburgh made a deliberate decision to preserve continuity over silence and legacy over loss. By aligning the Sapphires with Catherine's future, he ensured they remain part of a living narrative that stretches beyond Westminster and into the evolving story of the monarchy. In the end, the Cambridge Sapphires are not merely jewels, they are a thread connecting centuries of change, carrying grief, endurance, and identity forward, refusing to be broken by time or forgotten by history. What did the Duke truly see in Catherine's illness, recovery, and quiet return that changed everything in 2024? Was it only her resilience at Windsor and trooping the color? Or did memories of Diana and his own wife's struggles finally push him toward a decision he could no longer avoid? Let's uncover the intriguing details. The last decision of the Duke of Edinburgh. In 2024, the Duke watched one final thing that sealed his decision completely: Catherine's illness, the surgery, The long silence that followed, while the palace offered little clarity to a worried public, stayed with him more than anything else. Yet it was not only the struggle that marked his thinking, but the return that followed, quiet and controlled. Seen at Windsor Castle and later at Trooping the Colour, where she appeared changed but unbroken, moving forward on her own terms in 2024. He remembered other women too, Princess Diana suffering behind closed doors, while institutions hesitated, and his own wife facing ridicule without protection, memories that weighed heavily across decades. In the background, royal jewels tied to Princess Marina, including the Edinburgh Pearl Felsen tiara and other forgotten pieces, remained unused, locked away by succession traditions. By November 2025 at the Cenotaph in London, the Duke of Edinburgh, now in his 90s, made a quiet but defining choice, placing Catherine at the center of a legacy conversation no one expected. The moment was not written in any press release. It was spoken privately in a crowded ceremonial space where only she could hear. He decided that those historic pieces would not remain hidden in private collections, but would one day rest with the woman he believed represented continuity for the crown. Across royal circles, tensions simmered, with Camilla and even King Charles maintaining official silence, while protocols tried to contain the implications. Still, nothing could reverse what had already been set in motion by a man who had spent his life observing rather than speaking. By the time thoughts turned toward 2026 and future state occasions at Windsor and beyond, the idea of Catherine wearing the Edinburgh Pearl Felsen tiara became symbolic of endurance, inheritance, and survival across generations. It was not simply about jewels, but about history returning to public view through the person he trusted most to carry it forward into a new era. Nothing could erase the weight of that decision, nor the future it quietly secured for the monarchy itself. So what do you think is behind the Duke of Edinburgh's shocking decision to leave his crown jewels to Catherine instead of Camilla? We'd like to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like and subscribe.